I don't think people fully grasp the magnitude of what just happened on national television. So I want to start there, because we are so used to the constant, deafening noise of this administration, the scandals, the tweets, the daily outrages, that it is very easy to become numb. It is easy to assume this is just another one of those weeks. But this is not another one of those weeks. We have officially crossed the Rubicon from political corruption to potential war crimes. And no, that is not me being dramatic. That is me quoting a sitting United States Senator, Chris Van Hollen, who looked at the classified reports, looked at the death toll, and then looked into a camera and said
that President Trump told him that Trump had thought that members of our military were suckers and losers. And I see the president's mindset toward our National Guard and military.
it is very possible that the President of the United States and his chain of command are liable for war crimes. Stop scrolling for a second and really think about those words. We aren't talking about a policy disagreement. We aren't talking about whether tariffs are good for the economy. We're talking about the fact that reports now indicate Trump ordered 21 separate military strikes on Venezuelan boats, strikes that didn't just target drug runners, but allegedly targeted survivors in the water. We are talking about 83 dead bodies. We are talking about a double-tap strategy that, if proven true, violates the Geneva Conventions in the most explicit way possible. And the reason you need to pay attention to this right now is because the people in charge, the generals, the legal counsel, the sycophants, are panicking. You can smell it. They know that war crimes isn't something you can fix with a pardon. You can't spin your way out of the Hague. For years, there has been a protection racket around Donald Trump. The media calls it controversial. The GOP calls it strong leadership. But when you have mainstream networks like ABC airing segments questioning if the commander-in-chief is a war criminal, that racket is officially broken. The dam has burst. And here is the part that should keep the Trump legal team awake at night. The generals, the admirals, they aren't going to go to prison for him. They aren't going to let themselves be dragged to an international tribunal just to protect a man who would throw them under the bus in a heartbeat. They are going to talk. In fact, if Van Hollen's comments are any indication, they might already be talking. So if you're wondering why the tone in Washington has suddenly shifted from defensive to terrified, this is why. The bill is coming due. And this time the price isn't political capital, it's freedom. So let's stop looking at the shiny objects the administration is dangling in front of us and look at the actual evidence. Because once you peel back the layers of counter-narcotics rhetoric and border security talking points, what you find underneath is not a policy failure, it is a crime scene. And I want to be very specific here. I want to talk about September 2nd, 2025. According to classified briefings that have now leaked to multiple outlets, including the Washington Post and The Guardian, this was the day the gloves came off. A U.S. military drone operating under Title 10 authority, which is important, and we'll get to that in a minute, identified a small vessel off the coast of Venezuela. Intelligence analysts suspected it was carrying narcotics. Standard procedure in this scenario is clear. You disable the engine, you board the vessel, you arrest the crew, and you seize the contraband. That is how the Coast Guard has done it for decades. That is how the Navy has done it for decades. But that is not what happened. Instead, a kinetic strike was authorized. The boat was destroyed. And here is where the story shifts from aggressive interdiction to war crime.
According to reports, 2 men survived that initial explosion. They were in the water. They were clinging to debris. In military terms, they were hors de combat, out of the fight. Under the Geneva Conventions, specifically Common Article 3, which the United States is a signatory to, a combatant who has surrendered or is incapacitated by sickness, wounds, or shipwreck shall in all circumstances be treated humanely. You cannot shoot them. You cannot drop a second missile on them. Yet, that is exactly what happened. A second strike was ordered, a double tap. The survivors were vaporized. Now pause. Ask yourself, why? Why would a highly trained U.S. commander order a multi-million-dollar missile to be fired at 2 men treading water? The administration wants you to believe this was the fog of war. They want you to believe the boat was still a threat. But let's look at the receipts. Admiral Frank Bradley, the head of Special Operations Command, testified this week. And while he tried to dance around the specifics, he admitted something crucial. The rules of engagement, ROE, had been changed. See, normally, for a strike like this, you need hostile intent. You need to prove the target is about to attack you. But the Trump administration, specifically under the direction of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, reportedly altered the classification of these cartels. They designated them as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, and then, and this is the key, they treated them as enemy combatants in an active war zone. This is the legal sleight of hand they are using. They are trying to claim that the Caribbean Sea is a war zone like Fallujah in 2004. They are claiming that a drug smuggler on a boat is the same as an al-Qaeda fighter in a tank. But here is the problem with that logic. Even if you accept their premise, even if you accept that this is a war, you still cannot kill shipwreck survivors.
It doesn't matter if they are terrorists. It doesn't matter if they are drug dealers. It doesn't matter if they are the worst people on Earth. Once they're in the water, unarmed and helpless, killing them is murder. It is a textbook war crime. There is no gray area here. There is no context that makes it okay. And this is where the kill order comes in. We are now hearing reports, again, first broken by the Post, and now corroborated by sources speaking to Senator Van Hollen's office, that Secretary Hegseth issued a verbal directive to commanders. The phrase being used is kill everybody. Think about that. Kill everybody. If that order was given, it fundamentally shatters the chain of command. A soldier or a pilot has a duty to disobey an unlawful order. If a general tells a pilot to bomb a school bus, the pilot is legally required to say no. If a Secretary of Defense tells an admiral to kill everybody, including survivors in the water, the admiral is legally required to say no. But they didn't say no. They followed orders, and now 83 people are dead. And this brings us to the most cynical part of the defense. You have likely heard Trump surrogates on TV saying things like, well, we're killing the bad guys. Why are the Democrats crying about it? This is gaslighting 101. They are trying to frame this as a debate about being tough on drugs. They want you to argue about whether the Cartel de los Soles is bad. Do not take the bait. Of course, the cartel is bad. That is not the point. The point is that the United States of America has a uniform code of military justice. We have international treaties. We have a constitution. When you decide that the president can secretly authorize the military to act as a death squad, to execute people without trial, and then execute the survivors to eliminate witnesses, you have ceased to be a democracy governed by law. You have become a rogue state. And look at the hypocrisy here. Can you imagine, just for 1 second, if this had happened under a Democratic president? Can you imagine if Joe Biden had ordered a drone strike on a boat and then ordered the Navy to machine gun the survivors? The impeachment articles would have been drafted before the smoke cleared. Fox News would be running 24/7 coverage with the headline, Biden the Butcher. But because it's Trump, because it's drug dealers, we get silence from the GOP. We get Senator Tom Cotton saying the strikes were righteous. They are defending the indefensible because they are terrified of their own base. But here's the reality they can't ignore. The International Criminal Court doesn't care about the MAGA base. The Hague doesn't care about Fox News ratings. And that is why this is different. We aren't dealing with a political scandal that can be waited out. We are dealing with a forensic trail of evidence, video footage, flight logs, sworn testimony that points directly to a premeditated violation of the most basic laws of humanity. They thought they could hide it under national security. They thought they could bury it in classified briefings, but the leak has sprung. The video is out there, and for the first time, the I was just following orders defense isn't going to work. But if you think this started on September 2nd, 2025, you haven't been paying attention. This isn't a glitch in the Trump presidency, it is the entire operating system.
And this is where we need to zoom out. Because to understand why a U.S. admiral would feel comfortable ordering a double-tap strike on shipwreck survivors, you have to understand the culture of impunity that Donald Trump has spent nearly a decade building. Remember 2019? I know, it feels like a lifetime ago, but do you remember the names Eddie Gallagher and Clint Lawrence? Let me refresh your memory. Clint Lawrence was an Army lieutenant serving in Afghanistan who ordered his men to open fire on 3 unarmed men on a motorcycle. His own platoon testified against him. They called it murder. The military justice system worked. He was convicted and sentenced to 19 years in prison. Eddie Gallagher? He was a Navy SEAL accused by his own team, his own brothers in arms, of shooting civilians for sport and stabbing a sedated teenage captive to death in Iraq. The evidence was grotesque. And what did Donald Trump do? Did he respect the Uniform Code of Military Justice? Did he respect the rule of law? No. He pardoned them. He brought them to Mar-a-Lago. He treated them like rock stars. That was the signal. That was the moment the entire U.S. military command structure received a very clear message from the commander-in-chief. The rules don't apply anymore. If you kill the bad guys, or anyone who looks like a bad guy, I will have your back. So when you see Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who, let's not forget, was a Fox News host defending these exact war criminals on television before he was running the Pentagon, claiming that this Venezuela strike was just the fog of war, you should know better. This isn't fog, it's policy, and we have the receipts to prove it.
Go back to 2015. Do you remember what Trump said on Fox and Friends when asked about fighting terrorists? He didn't say we need better intelligence. He didn't say we need more drones. He said, and I quote, "You have to take out their families." He told us explicitly that he believes in targeting non-combatants. He told us that the Geneva Conventions are a joke to him. And now, in 2025, we are acting surprised that he's actually doing it. The only difference between then and now is that back then, he had people in the room to stop him. He had General Mattis. He had John Kelly. He had people who, for all their faults, understood that the United States does not act like a cartel. But those people are gone. They have been purged. And who is left? Pete Hegseth, a man who Senator Chris Van Hollen just referred to on the Senate floor as Secretary Talk Show Host. A man whose primary qualification seems to be his willingness to turn the U.S. military into a personal enforcement arm for the president's political grievances. And look at how they're handling the legal fallout. This is the other part of the pattern that is crucial. Just a few days ago, reports surfaced that the Trump administration is once again threatening sanctions against the International Criminal Court. Why? Because the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, has the audacity to suggest that international law applies to everyone. Trump's response isn't to argue the facts, it's to try and destroy the court. He did it in his first term, sanctioning the prosecutors. He is doing it now. It is a consistent, strategic effort to dismantle the very idea of accountability. So when Admiral Bradley testifies that he didn't receive a specific kill order, ask yourself, did he need one? Or did he just know who he was working for? When you spend years celebrating war criminals, when you pardon murderers, when you call for executions of families, you don't need to write a memo saying break the law. You have already created a permissiveness where breaking the law is the path to promotion. That is why this Venezuela incident is so dangerous. It's not an isolated oops. It is the inevitable result of an administration that views the Geneva Conventions not as a code of honor, but as political correctness that gets in the way of winning. And let's be honest about the racial element here. Do we think for 1 second that if these boats were full of white Europeans, we would be seeing double tap strikes? Do we think Trump would be on TV calling them animals and sons of bitches if they weren't Latino? This is the ugliness that is baked into the strategy, to humanize the enemy, call them monsters, call them narco-terrorists. And once you've done that, you can do anything to them. You can blow them up, you can shoot the survivors, and you can count on your base to cheer, and your generals to look the other way. But this time they went too far. This time there is video, and this time the world is watching. So where does this road end? Because if you think this story stops at the water's edge in the Caribbean, you are missing the bigger picture. We are watching the real-time dismantling of the American moral high ground. And I don't say that lightly. For decades, the United States has projected power not just through aircraft carriers, but by the idea, however imperfectly executed, that we are a nation of laws. We are the ones who wrote the Geneva Conventions. We are the ones who prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg. We are the ones who tell dictators that they can not just execute people because they feel like it. But what happens when we become the ones doing the executing? The immediate consequence is that we lose the ability to hold anyone else accountable. How do we look Vladimir Putin in the eye and lecture him about war crimes in Ukraine when our own administration is sanctioning the International Criminal Court for daring to investigate us? How do we tell China to respect human rights when our own Secretary of Defense is reportedly issuing kill everyone orders? We don't. We lose that standing instantly. We become just another rogue state with better weapons. But the domestic consequences are even more terrifying. And this is the part that should chill you to the bone. The Trump administration has already designated these drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That sounds tough, right? It sounds like a strong policy choice. But look at the legal architecture they are building around that designation. By treating drug smuggling as an act of war, they are effectively bypassing the entire criminal justice system. No trials, no juries, no evidence presented in a court of law. Just a drone strike and a press release. Now ask yourself, what stops them from expanding that definition? If the president can unilaterally decide that a group of people is a threat to national security, and therefore can be liquidated by the military without due process, who is next? We have already heard this president refer to his political opponents as the enemy within. We have heard him call journalists enemies of the people. I'm not saying he's going to drone strike a newsroom tomorrow, but I am saying that once you establish the precedent that the president has the authority to order extrajudicial killings based on his own secret criteria, you have crossed a line that you cannot uncross. You have handed a loaded gun to a man who has shown us time and time again that he has no trigger discipline. And this brings us to the end game.
They are counting on you being tired. They are counting on you hearing the phrase war crime and thinking, oh, it's just politics. They are counting on the media moving on to the next scandal in 24 hours, but we cannot let them move on. Senator Van Hollen has opened a door that we have to walk through. We need to know who gave the order. We need to see the video footage that the Pentagon is currently fighting to keep classified. We need to know if the President of the United States watched a strike on survivors and gave a thumbs up. Because if we don't, if we let this slide, if we let 83 deaths become just a statistic, then we are complicit. We are accepting a version of America where the rule of law is optional, where the military is a personal enforcement arm of the White House, and where human rights is just a punchline for cable news hosts. The generals are panicked because they know the law. The administration is panicked because they know the truth. But panic isn't enough. We need accountability. This is the test. It's not a test of Donald Trump. We know who he is. It's a test of us. It's a test of Congress. Are we a nation of laws, or are we something else? The answer to that question is being written right now. Don't look away. I'm Ethan Cole. If you want to stay on top of this story as it develops, make sure you're subscribed. And I'll see you next time.